Israel Update with Gadi and Mike Duran. Hello and welcome to Israel Update. It is today, September 11th. What a date. And it's 341 days since this war began. We're approaching a year. I'm Gadi in Tel Aviv, and Mike Duran is, I'm guessing he's in a secure location, but I don't know where he is. So he's not here today. He will be here tomorrow, and we will have a regular episode. For now, my guest on this very special occasion of Mike's absence is lawyer Brooke Goldstein, who heads the Lawfare Project. Shalom, Brooke.
Shalom. Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful to be here.
It's a real pleasure, and you are one of the people who understood the code of the system, and we are very late to understand how this has been operating against us. We are faced not just with a war of terror, but also with an attack on our legitimacy, and then also on our rights. And you figured it out that we should start playing on that field too. Can you tell me what you are? It's called the Lawfare Project. What's your project? Can you tell me what you guys are doing now when Jewish students are faced with this horrendous wave of anti-Semitism on American campuses?
Yes, thank you. Well, we're calling it Jew hatred. Gadi, not many people know the origin of the term anti-Semitism. It was actually invented by German eugenicists as a pseudo-intellectual way of basically describing a body of work that said the Semitic races, not just Jews, all the Semitic races in the Middle East and on the east coast of the Mediterranean are inferior to whites. And we've adopted this terminology as our own, but it really doesn't serve us. Jew hatred is more visceral. I think it's more descriptive. And if you're against hatred against Blacks, hatred against Muslims, hatred against gays, hatred against women, surely you also must be against hatred against Jews, because otherwise you are a bigot. And, nobody is born with Jew hatred in their heart. People say, how do you end Jew hatred? Even the Torah says, every generation they rise up against us. But, Jew hatred is taught. And you mentioned in the beginning that we're late to the game. I just read an article that I had published about 15 years ago about UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency. And I also made a movie about the indoctrination of Muslim children. We have been warning about UNRWA, which is basically an arm of Hamas in Gaza, but also in Judea and Samaria, as an indoctrination machine, as a state-sponsored mass infanticide that's targeting and radicalizing Muslim youth and teaching them to kill Jews. And we wake up on October the 7th and we're surprised at the level of evil that we see when not only we have tolerated it and we have known about it, but we have allowed innocent Muslim children for over 20, 30 years that have grown up, they become the next generation to be indoctrinated on a steady diet of hate education. And I've started my career arguing that this is the greatest crime against humanity, is the hate education happening not only in the majority of Muslim countries, although some countries like Saudi Arabia have revised their textbooks and should be commended for that, but also now this hate indoctrination that is being imported into American college campuses, frankly, throughout the Western world, and funded by states like Qatar. Qatar is the number 2 state sponsor of Hamas, the number 2 state sponsor of the Hamas designated terrorist group, financial sponsor. And they're also the number 1 financial sponsor of the educational system in the United States. There's something wrong with that. And yet it's been going on for over, at least in the United States, Qatar has spent over $1 billion a year for the last 10 years. And we've known about it, and there's been no accountability. And now we are witnessing the results of that.
It's amazing because there's no direct intellectual connection between the hatred taught in Palestinian books, which is wild Islamic anti-Semitism, which harks back to the Hadith and the Quran, and what is taught in the United States, which relies on or which is saturated with post-colonial Edward Said a kind of education. But it's amazing that the financial root is the same.
Right. And it's a trick that is often used, and it's the marriage of these two philosophies, the Islamist radical theology married with like a Marxist, communist, anarchist, which on its face is diametrically opposed. But when you focus on a common enemy, and what they've done is they've created this so-called Israeli-Palestinian conflict that's manufactured and funded, and they've created it for the purpose of being that scapegoat, of creating those blood libel excuses to get out on the street. And now we see in America the defacing and tearing down and destruction of American monuments. I believe there was a Palestinian student group that just posted on Twitter and then deleted that they aim for the destruction of America and total revolution and overhaul of the system of democracy and capitalism. And these are the values of the West that are being attacked. And Israel is a decoy. The Jews are a decoy. The pro-Hamas mobs that are running rampant. I never thought I'd say this. Running rampant in America in 2024 are pro-terror mobs on the street, and they're violent mobs. And they're being justified, and they're being excused by the mainstream media. They're being supported by certain in the radical left, by Rashida Tlaib, for example, members of government. This has become systemic.
And Kamala Harris. These people are at least sympathetic to the whole range from BLM all the way up to Tim Walz now saying that the demonstrators in university are demonstrating for all the right reasons. If this is also anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, as I think it is, how can you explain that this has become a party that is poised to stay in power while it's promoting something and also financing, right? The donors for the campus activists are also donors for the Democratic Party. How has an anti-American philosophy entrenched itself so deeply in a governing party?
Well, so first of all, I want to make clear that I'm speaking from my personal opinion right now, not in the capacity of running the Lawfare Project, but in my personal opinion. And I find it very alarming that even the issue of anti-Semitism has become politicized, that these charges and accusations, you're an anti-Semite or you're a Jew hatred, they're like a political football. And the most dangerous thing that I see, at least for the Jewish community, and obviously extrapolated for the United States at large, is this division, the disunity. Even in Israel, prior to October 7th, you had pro-reform, anti-reform. And in America, you have this division of the Jewish community over political partisan lines, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, what have you. And it has seeped in and prevented us from acting as a unified whole in the best interests of the community. So even way back, for example, we were the first to file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights under an executive order that was issued by former President Trump that modified Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to include protection of religion as a category, not just, it was like race and ethnicity, gender, whatever, also religion. And half of the community, the Jewish community, could not bring themselves to support the filing of a civil rights claim under Title VI because President Trump is the one who expanded it. And I guarantee you, if former President Obama was the one to move the embassy to Jerusalem, surely I'd be one of the first ones there lining up to praise him. I don't care what party, all right, does the right thing. And I think that we need to remember that and vote, obviously keeping in mind not just the interests of Israel. I mean, we are Jewish Americans. And like you said, this is an issue about the protection and safety of the Jewish community as a minority community. We conflate that too much. There's Israel, but then there's also the civil rights movement and the civil rights issue in America, which is separate and apart. We cannot conflate it. Oh, I can't hear you. Are you?
That's my
You're
fault.
on mute. Yeah.
So this is where your leverage is, where you take a consensus vehicle like civil rights and say Jews have these rights too, which sadly has to be said. So give us an example of how this can operate in the Lawfare Project in a concrete case.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say, just sort of add to what you just said in the sense that the more that we respond to anti-Jewish discrimination, which is a civil rights issue with political arguments, with pro-Israel arguments, the more we give them an affirmative defense to discriminate against us. Okay, so let's say I dislike the government of China because of the way they handled COVID. It's not justified for me to go to a Chinese American student and harass him and call him a COVID spreader and discriminate against him because I'm projecting my hatred of the Chinese government on him because of the way he looks or where he's born. That's racism, and everybody would recognize that. So why is it acceptable to go to someone like Jonathan Carton, my client, who was a student at Columbia University, an Israeli American Jew? He was a student, he was 19 years old, spit on him and call him a dirty Zionist baby killer because that's political speech. You're protesting Israel. And we don't respond to that with, well, the amount of babies that the IDF has killed is actually so and so. You respond to anti-Jewish discrimination with civil rights methods, whether it's civil rights advocacy, whether it's civil rights lawsuits. The Jewish community deserves equal protection under the law. And it is unlawful to discriminate against a Jewish person because they're Jewish. That is what's happening. Jewish students are being targeted because they're Jewish. Jewish nurses and doctors that we represent, Jewish prisoners that we represent, Jewish employees in the tech field that we represent are being treated differently because they're Jewish. And the excuse is, well, I'm upset at Israel for political reasons. That's outrageous and it's completely unacceptable. And so what we've done with the End-Jew Hatred movement and also with the Lawfare Project is civil rights advocacy. What was incredible to me is before I founded the Lawfare Project in 2010, there had been no organized, strategic, legal offense, just like the Black community has used with the NAACP or the free speech community uses with the ACLU or the Center for Constitutional Rights, or the Muslim community has a legal fund, the Muslim Legal Fund for America, the Council on American Islamic Relations. There was no litigation fund or Jewish civil rights public interest law firm that was dedicated to enforcing the civil rights of the Jewish community using the legal system. And this is as American as apple pie. Because if you think about it, all of the rights that we enjoy as American citizens are mostly products of seminal civil rights cases. We watched the debate last night. It was all about, some of it was about abortion and the Supreme Court case and whether this is a states' right issue or not. The Asian American community just brought a lawsuit against Harvard and won and got rid of affirmative action because it was discriminating against them, right? Brown v. Board of Education, the Roe v. Wade, Brown v. Board got rid of segregation in the South.
So in a way, what you're saying, Brooke, is how did people not think of this before? And let me suggest a sad explanation. Jews accepted the accusation that they are part of the white hegemony, and therefore, and since civil rights cases are in our imagination only relevant to minorities, Jews have begun to think of themselves as those who are to pay reparations, not those who are to receive them.
Well, no, I disagree. I'll push back on that. Jews were at the forefront of the Black civil rights movement. We were working together with the Black community.
for blacks,
and that's my point. The NAACP, we don't. The
but
problem
not
is
for themselves.
always advocated for others.
Exactly.
Right. So why is that? Is it a combination of that? We don't want to recognize victimhood status. Something that is remarkable about the Jewish community, obviously, is the fact that we continue to survive and the perseverance. And not only do we survive, but we thrive. And it's used against us. It's a miracle, an incredible achievement that after over 6 million Jews were killed, my grandparents came to this country, started a new life, raised a healthy family, had a business, and they survived and they thrived. And yet, it's used against us, and it also prevents us from accepting that we're traumatized, that we actually are victims and we're being victimized. And then there's the trauma of the fear of standing up for yourself, which is, I think, what you were getting at, right? So when I first launched the Lawfare Project and we filed a couple of our first cases, I got a phone call from the CEO of a now defunct, very large Jewish organization who was frankly yelling at me, telling me, who do I think I am? I'm coming in. They're engaged in behind the scenes, closed door negotiations. I'm creating more anti-Semitism by filing lawsuits, giving the impression the Jewish community is moneyed up and aggressive. You're too aggressive. And I thought to myself, could you imagine someone in the Black community accusing the NAACP of being too aggressive, too aggressively asserting for the civil rights of the Black community? I mean, just last week I had a conversation with CEOs of more organizations who serve us well, and they do well. But there's a resistance to a change of strategy that includes not just top down, but bottom up, including grassroots mobilization, filing civil rights lawsuits, engaging in those types of strategies that have served other minority rights communities. And so when we launched End Jew Hatred, it was done based on a study actually of what those strategies and tactics are. And most importantly, was using the legal system as well as engaging in protest and direct actions from the ground up, local actions, like really getting into the community, rising up new leadership, training new leadership, not necessarily just having to rely on organizations to solve the problem for us. The community is frustrated. Why haven't these organizations done more to fight anti-Semitism? Well, it's not what they're doing for us. It's what are we doing? We have to mobilize as a community. Each of us have to play a part, and people are frustrated because they don't know what to do. So what the movement is doing, and I'll just end with this, is providing strategic support, financial support, and of course, pro bono legal support to enable communities to mobilize for themselves to create the change that they want to see.
It's amazing what you're saying about the fact that some Jews are afraid to stand up for their rights. And I'll give another example of maybe that may illuminate what I tried to say before about Jews thinking about themselves the way their accusers already think of them, coded as white within this hierarchy. Because what you are doing is basically challenging the rigid hierarchy of who is supposed to be a victim. So I'll give you an example which frustrated me greatly, because I was in touch with Yigal Carmon of Memory. I don't know if you
it's a great organization.
They do great work. So they had a project about imams in mosques in North America, and they found that about 95% of them are spewing wild, violent anti-Semitism. And they collected this trove of information, and they went to Jewish organizations and they said, look, there's a danger here. Do something about it. And they were too afraid to be accused of Islamophobia. So when you say, and this goes on all the time, when the campus pro-Hamas demonstrations erupted, what did the Biden administration do? Create a government arm to fight Islamophobia. That's the first thing they did.
Yeah.
And so this discourse is turned against Jews in the way civil rights have been used. So in that sense, what you did is not at all trivial for I'm guessing for American Jews. Although what you're saying is this should be the mainstream of human rights discourse, because here's a minority and it's discriminated against. but the hierarchy of victimhood has us now in the position of a perpetrator.
Right. And so, I mean, I wrote my first book on this basic subject. It's called Lawfare, the War Against Free Speech, a First Amendment Guide for Reporting in an Age of Islamist Lawfare. And basically, it was about what I call Islamophobomania, which is the attempt and successful attempt for quite some time to silence and to punish the exercise of free speech about national security issues such as the threat of radical Islam, theologically motivated terrorism, incitement in our mosques. Anybody who, like me, was talking or writing or making movies about it started getting sued. So I was actually operating before the Lawfare Project, a litigation defense fund at the Middle East Forum with Daniel Pipes, where we provided pro bono legal representation to moderate Muslims or members of the counterterrorism community who were sued for warning about these things. Like, for example, when 17 media defendants were sued for warning about the Islamic Society of Boston, which at that time was getting funding from Saudi Arabia. People like Daniel Pipes, the Wall Street Journal, wrote articles about how ISB was using that funding allegedly to radicalize their the mosque goers. They shut down the speech by suing them, and then lo and behold, the Boston bombers come, which were also allegedly radicalized at ISB. And you think that if we were allowed to speak freely and to investigate, and if the government did its job by investigating the sources of funding that are not in our national security interest, would we have had the Boston Marathon bombing attack? I don't think we would have. But there was also threats of violence. Don't forget, people like Geert Wilders or Ayaan Hirsi Ali, or even I think it was the Cartoon Network when they were going to do a cartoon on South Park. There are threats of violence, and they've tried to silence us. But I think, again, a silver lining, and I hate using that terminology when it comes to October 7th, is that we've woken up, right? The world woke up once before. The world woke up on 9/11 to the threat of radical Islam. And then we were bullied into silence and being complicit and allowing indoctrination over many, many years. And now the world has woken up once again after October the 7th and seeing what's going on in the streets of Western democracies. And I hope that they demand accountability. Law enforcement obviously should be doing their job, but also attorney generals. Alvin Bragg, for example, I think 150 people were arrested at the Columbia University encampment, and hardly any of those were booked and charged. It's like a revolving door, the system, and it only goes to encourage more violence. And I hate to say this, but I feel like I have a duty. I think that they are preparing for pogroms. I think what we're seeing is the steady increase of violence and tactics and testing of law enforcement, how they will react when they show up outside a Jewish synagogue in LA. In LA, a center of power of Jews, they're going straight to the center, straight to New York. How will law enforcement and the community react when we violently block Jews from entrance into the synagogue? Go back, learn their lessons. What do you think is happening next? What do you think is going to happen next? I think that they're preparing for pogroms. And I think that law enforcement has to be prepared. And it's absolutely imperative that the Jewish community protect themselves, that use all legal means possible, including enforcing civil rights law, and also demanding accountability from our members of government to investigate these sources of radicalization and to shut it down immediately.
So should Jews actually be worried about their physical safety in the United States nowadays?
Jews have always had to worry about their physical safety. And now Jew hatred is rising again as it comes in ebbs and flows, and you just have to open your eyes to see it. But however, I'm not preaching this to instill fear, the opposite, because I am confident that the unity that we see right now, even though there are still very powerful forces that are trying to divide us, but the unity of the Jewish community and what I see with the End Jew Hatred movement and the bravery and the courage of our clients at the Lawfare Project, they are moving mountains. They are courageously filing groundbreaking civil rights lawsuits, and we are winning and we are succeeding. And the activists, we have thousands of activists across the country, are mobilizing themselves, and they are forcing real change to happen because they are leveraging the collective power of the communities, and they're pushing in the same direction. Thank God. I have a great hope for this country. I love the United States of America, my home. I love this country. It is a blessed country. And I know that the Jewish community, together with our allies, which happens to be the majority of Americans, everybody says this is a small but vocal minority. Small, vocal, dangerous, violent minorities are dangerous, okay? But the majority of the United States of America, I think, is awake and understands what's happening. And I have full faith and confidence that this country will turn itself around. But it's going to take work and it's going to take pressure. And we have to be prepared to do that work.
As an Israeli, and you can respond any way you like from the project or from your own opinion, I don't feel that American Jews have woken up. If they don't understand what is going on with the Democratic administration, and I don't want to use harsh Donald Trumpian rhetoric, but if they're going to vote for Kamala Harris, who chooses for her liaison to the Jewish community a person who is advancing something right in your field, right? They're advancing sanctions against Israeli citizens for political purposes in a way never done before by any administration towards an ally. Then people who are voting for that administration are clearly not understanding what Kamala Harris is saying when she says she has sympathy for the feelings of the campus protests.
Yeah, I agree. What's so troubling about that particular sanctions issue, which is being implemented currently by the Biden administration, they are sanctioning Jews who are doing business and living in Judea. And it's discriminatory on its face. I mean, if I told you there was an area in Belgium where no Jews are allowed, they're not allowed to live there, they're not allowed to go, or there's a section of Paris and no Jews are allowed, it would be outrageous. But there are no Jews allowed in Judea. This is the policy of the United States of America. It's discriminatory on its face, and frankly, it's illegal. And to sanction individuals based on their religion, saying Muslims can live in Judea, Christians can live in Judea, Druze, Buddhists, anyone can live in Judea but Jews. The Jewish presence, this notion that a Jewish person living is some sort of provocation to violence, that they deserve to be attacked, that their presence is illegal, is really rooted in the worst kind of bigotry and discrimination, really the type of bigotry that underlies and justifies genocide. Because when you dehumanize someone, you take away their humanity, you call their presence illegal, and you say that presence is a justification, it's some sort of illegal occupation which justifies a resistance. This is the whole MO of this violent movement that kills Jewish babies and burns and rapes women alive. And to see the United States, the most incredible democracy in human history, this great country, adopt a foreign policy that advocates that type of discrimination is disappointing, and it's dangerous.
Brooke, to conclude, let's go back to the bird's eye view. Is the project, except for standing up for individual Jews and fighting discrimination in academia, is there a legal way to get at the Qatari funding too?
So I wouldn't necessarily call it a legal way to get at the Qatari funding, but now putting on my Lawfare Project hat, we're very proud to represent a student at Carnegie Mellon University, which also happens to be I think it's the second or third or fourth largest recipient of Qatari money. They've received reportedly anywhere between 600 to 800 million dollars from Qatar. And we are suing the school for rampant Jew hatred and discrimination. And no doubt, there is a causal connection between the outsized grants and the purposes for which those grants are being carried out and the effects of it, which is the discriminatory and hostile environment against Jews and the spread of disinformation about the Jewish state and whatever other anti-Americanism comes with that as well. And while it is the government's role to investigate illegal foreign funding, because as a citizen, we are limited. We can enforce civil rights law. There's no doubt that this particular anti-discrimination case that we have filed against Carnegie Mellon University will expose what is going on there. And then the question is, what does members of government do about it? What does someone like Elise Stefanik, who's made it her mission to uncover this issue and to solve it, and Virginia Fox, does the government represent the American people, and will they serve our interests by shutting down any foreign funding, not just from Qatar, but it's coming also from China. It's coming from Russia. We see Iran funding the protests, reports of Iran funding. I mean, hundreds of students don't just show up. You look at them, they're idiots. They look like idiots. They don't just show up with all of this material, with all of these strategy, with all of the same green tents, knowing innately how to lock arms, how to mobilize. I was shown a presentation where at each of these campus and campus, there's a yellow vested student who's well trained in keeping out people, and they're doing so illegally, and yet law enforcement, especially the schools, are not enforcing their own policies. So while civil rights lawsuits like ours play a huge role, the onus really is on the American government to protect us.
Brooke Goldstein, thank you very much for coming on this show. In fact, I think I'm going to screen this on our American podcast too, Mike Duran and I, on Israel Update. American Jews should hear this in English. And thank you for everything that you are doing.
Thank you for everything you're doing and for having me. Like I said before, it's really an honor to be on with you. I've wanted to have this conversation for quite some time.
A pleasure and a privilege. Thank you very much.